Thanks, everyone, for joining us back here at the Project Censored radio show. We're very glad right now to be joined by Ellen Barfield, who currently serves on the national boards of Veterans for Peace, the War Resisters League, Military Families Speak Out, and the Center on Conscience and War. And on climate issues, she works primarily with the anti-fracking group Beyond Extreme Energy. She spent 4 years in the U.S. Army from 1977 to 1981, stationed during that time in Germany, South Korea, as well as U.S. bases. Curiosity about why so many U.S. troops were in those nations very long after the hot wars there led her to activism challenging the huge number of U.S. bases worldwide, nuclear weapons, militarism, in general. As she has for over 35 years, she supports struggles for justice, challenging racism, homophobia, and misogyny. Ellen has participated in peace delegations to and solidarity work with Palestine, Iraq, Korea, and Nicaragua. Ellen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Eleanor. It's very good to be here.
So, Ellen, we could, and we should, have you on the show to discuss your impressive career in fighting the powers that be. But I've actually asked you on today to discuss your personal connection with Georgia RICO charges. That's Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations. And listeners might be familiar with that term with regards to former President Donald Trump or indeed Stop Cop City. And in the second half of the show, folks will hear from a member of Stop Cop City and defendant Lana Forrest to discuss the RICO charges that they're facing. And it bears mentioning that the Georgia RICO charges are different than the federal RICO charges, and Georgia's are more intense. The federal act was established to target organized crime activities like money laundering, bribery, drug trafficking, and other serious offenses. But Georgia's version says that attempting or soliciting any of the mentioned crimes can count as a predicate act. And while some might say that Trump represents the poster child for the supposed aim of RICO, community organizers and social justice activists represent a twisted perversion of the stated goals of RICO. And since one of the things that we aim to do here on the Project Censored Show is offer important context to issues in the media, I'm very glad, Ellen, that you were able to join us to discuss your personal experience. So first off, can you take us back to late February 2009 and describe how your husband was first targeted by this legislation?
Yes. He was an anesthesiologist, professor of anesthesia in medical schools all his career. But after he had retired, one of the things he volunteered for was to work with an organization called the Final Exit Network, which does not assist suicide, never did. What it did do, and still does to some extent, although they were frightened enough to back off some, but what they did and still do is counsel people about methods of self-deliverance and accompany them when they do whatever they do. The final exit people don't do anything. They have First Amendment rights to speak to people, give them information, and just the personal right to be with them. And that's what they do. They don't assist suicide. They are aware that people get to the end, approaching the end with terrible conditions they don't want to live through every last painful breath of. And they provide counseling and accompaniment, not assistance. So obviously that is iffy for some people and illegal or threatened with illegality. And it happens that Final Exit was incorporated in Georgia. It also happens that I'm originally from Georgia, so I had some particular interest, but nothing direct about this. But we found out that the Georgia RICO is way worse than the federal RICO. What I have said basically is that if two people sit down for a cup of coffee in Georgia and some authority overhears them and doesn't like what they're talking about, wham, they get hit with a RICO charge. It is very much used to be able to report as terrible, dangerous, awful, racketeering, corrupt, yada, yada. And of course, to threaten the organization and the people. And that's exactly what happened. Final Exit, as I said, was incorporated in Georgia. How convenient. So there was a man who had a mouth or throat cancer from being a smoker. And he had had surgery, and he still had a hole in his cheek and was dripping saliva. And his idiot doctor claimed he was cancer-free months after surgery, which you got to go 5 years before they'll even say that. And even that's not true. I have personal experience, which I won't go into, not myself, but a loved one who came back with a metastasis long after 5 years. But anyway, a few months is ridiculous, but the doctor said the man was divorced, but his wife and he were still interacting a fair amount. She found a Final Exit Network flyer in his apartment after he died and called the authorities. So the Georgia Bureau of Investigation got involved, and they set up a sting with 2 Final Exit people, staff or volunteers, I'm not sure which, in Georgia, where they used this man's case for a guy who turned out to be a cop to say, oh, I've got pancreatic cancer and I don't want to live with it all. Could you help me? And they recorded it and they used it as their evidence. They arrested those 2 people in Georgia. My husband is the national medical director and the regional director, the Southeast regional director, who also happened to live in Baltimore. And they showed up at my husband's office with a SWAT team of Baltimore homicide cops, along with some GBI people. Homicide cops, for God's sake. Even if it was assisted suicide, that's not a homicide. And they showed up at our house also, where fortunately I happened to be. So they didn't break down our door, because the other guy's door they broke down, and his junior high daughter showed up a little while later. Fortunately, she called him and he said, go to the neighbors. I know what's happening. We'll deal with it. But that outrageous kind of behavior in and of itself was the beginning of understanding how outrageous they were being. So my husband and the other guy were held for several days, arraigned, or at least had a hearing on a Friday, and promised and did go to Georgia to be arraigned there. And okay, legal procedures will ensue. At some point, we came to understand that the RICO charges had been part of the deal. And we're like, what? This isn't the mafia. What are you talking about? But okay, we came to understand what they did, what it allowed them to do was confiscate Final Exit Network's money because it was incorporated in Georgia and banked in Georgia. Another thing they did, and I assume this is happening with Cobb City people too, is that they took the organization's documentation of clients and they went all over the damn country looking for other people to bring other suits. And there were some other suits brought. But, just outrageous, way over the top, legal, not even legal, it shouldn't be legal, procedures to harass and shut down the Final Exit Network. And that's so very clearly what they're doing with Cobb City also, is no, you can't have your money. No, you can't have your public standing as decent people. And no, you're going to face a lot. Yes, you're going to face a lot of terrible legal threats for years to come. So here we go again.
And I'm curious because you're in Baltimore, and I assume that your husband was as well. It's Georgia state RICO charges. So how does that, wouldn't that be cross state lines? Was the FBI involved? How did that work?
The Georgia Bureau of Investigation was involved. I don't know that the FBI was, maybe. But as I said, they dragooned Baltimore homicide cops into doing the home invasion and the office invasion. And interestingly, here at home, and I'm ashamed to admit, it was the first time I faced it, even though I philosophically knew it. I forgot right away to say, where the hell is, where is your search warrant? But I did remember it, and I did start demanding it, and they said later. But the Georgia Bureau of Investigation guys were actually pretty decent, and they said, yes, we have one, and we'll get it to you. And they did not even bother my computer. They said, that's your computer, not your husband's, right? I said, yes. They said, okay. They looked in his office. His computer was at his office downtown, not at home. So yes, they looked at it, but not here. They went through some paperwork. They took a business card that affiliated his name with Final Exit. They took a documentation of some expenses he was due to be reimbursed for. And they took his calendar, which had some notice of some meetings with Final Exit, to prove that, yes, he really was who they thought he was. But they were pretty good. But the homicide cops, of course, were aggressive and ugly, and way too many of them. And our good friend, the head of the Maryland ACLU, showed up outside on the street and wanted to get into counsel with me. Larry also volunteered with the ACLU, so they knew him. And she wanted to talk with me, and they wouldn't let her in, and they threatened her with arrest. So she said, "I'll call you later," and she did. And it was ACLU attorneys who helped through the arraignment process and to get him out of jail. But they were way over the top, way outrageous. And again, this is exactly what's happening with the Cop City people.
So what happened next? I mean, when you found out that there were RICO charges, what were the next steps in the process?
Well, we got over picking our teeth up off the floor, first of all. And then we slowly came to understand, oh, the money. Okay, now we get it. The money and the handicapping, the total handicapping of the organization at that point. And we came to hear about going all over the country looking for other cases, which was, knock on somebody's door and say, "We're here to find out if you're still alive. And if you are, if you want to bring a suit against these people who are threatening to kill you, I mean, please." But that's what we heard and what we found out. Outrageous. And all of that was over time. And, nothing legal happens quick. That's part of the ability they have, is to shut down whatever you're doing for the duration of the legal proceedings. It's part of the problem. And so we waited and we heard and we learned. And eventually, and it was approximately a year after those initial arrests, Final Exit Network, not the individual arrestees, but Final Exit Network, has a day in court with the Georgia Supreme Court. And we were physically there to hear it. It was the first thing they heard in the morning, and they were still, half asleep, sipping on their coffee, not paying much attention. But as our person gave, I think it was 20 minutes, but whatever time frame, gave the presentation about how we saw all this as opposed to how they saw it, you could see the Supreme Court justices sort of sit up and lean forward and get a little thought crease in their foreheads, oh, this is interesting. It's not just more garbage that we have to sift through of an early morning. And it happens. And of course, it took a while. But the Georgia Supreme Court unanimously overturned the RICO charges and said, "You have done nothing to document why you think Final Exit Network's procedures are racketeering, influenced, and corrupt behavior. So give the money back." So they did. But it took nearly a year. And of course, it was very handicapping in the meantime. And as I alluded to, Final Exit has stepped back a fair amount from the boldness that they used to have because of terror. That's part of what the so-called legal system, justice system does, is frighten people into not doing what they've been doing. So Final Exit still functions, but not nearly as boldly as they used to.
And in terms of your husband's personal experience, what happened with him with regards to the RICO charges? What effect did it have on him?
Directly, not much, because they did just not ever pursue, probably drop, but I'm not sure, but just not ever pursue anything against the 4 individuals who were arrested. It became clear that they were really going after the organization. And so from Georgia, he had no personal impact other than being nervous for a good while until it did seem to pull back. Now, because of that, going all over the country and looking for other cases, he was charged in Arizona and actually tried in Arizona and acquitted because he had never physically been to Arizona or met with the woman who had hastened her own death. Another guy was convicted of a much reduced charge, which entailed a year's probation, and then that was gone. So, and the other two people had pled out because they had health issues and couldn't really deal with the extended legal proceedings. So 4 people involved there too, just coincidentally. He also was charged in Minnesota, where he and another person years before had counseled and accompanied a woman who'd had a terrible automobile accident and never really recovered and was in a lot of pain and wanted to go ahead and end her life. And they still claimed that they were going to try my husband, but he died. So they couldn't do that. And again, that was also largely aimed at the organization. And if I recall correctly, they had to pay a fine, a few tens of thousands of dollars, not massive amounts. For an individual, it would have been. Organizationally, it was not great, but okay. So there again, it was really more aimed at the organization. But that business of going all over the country, seeking, bugging people, are you still alive? And do you want to bring suit? And I would assume, I've been following Cop City fairly closely because of the Georgia connection and because I so totally support saving the forest, avoiding yet another militarized police training facility. It's just outrageous. And so I've been following it to some extent, and I'm sure I know, in fact, I have friends who've been down there from all over the country. I've not been able to go, but I know other people have. And I expect that's part of what has happened or will happen with regards to Cop City resistance, is that people from all over will be threatened with even RICO charges. If not, it's illegal for you to share funds or, all the things they're doing. That's part of what our so-called justice system does, is harass people. Frequently, the charges either go away or are much reduced, but the initial charges are really outrageous, and that's what goes in the media. That's what people hear who don't know diddly about it. They just hear, oh, this is really awful, how dare they? And then if it gets reported at all, it's very minimal on the back page. Well, they couldn't really sustain that case, so they dropped it. Who hears that? Not many.
Yeah. And do you feel that this whole ordeal contributed to your husband's death?
Absolutely. Absolutely. What happened here in Maryland was no lawsuit against him. They couldn't get any family to sustain one. We got told by several families whose loved ones he had accompanied. They came and wanted us to bring suit against you. And we said, hell no. We said we were very grateful for him being with our loved one. We don't want to bring a suit against him. So they went to the Maryland Medical Board and said, we want to take away his license to practice medicine. We claimed that he was improperly practicing medicine. And sadly, Final Exit wouldn't help him on that, because some of the cases he had accompanied were under a previous organization called the Hemlock Society, not Final Exit itself. So they said, nope. He did get legal assistance through the Quaker meeting where he was attending someone they knew who helped him with the paperwork. And it wasn't free, but it was somewhat reduced. So it didn't bankrupt us or anything. But, Final Exit should have done it very definitely. They didn't. But he went to court, and the court upheld the removal of his license. So he appealed it. And the attorney couldn't even be with him on the appeal, but he did the paperwork. So Larry and I were in court together, hearing the judge at the appeal. And the judge, very interestingly, apparently personally really sympathized and even said, Dr. Egbert is ahead of his time. But the judge also didn't feel like he could overturn the medical board. So he upheld the removal of the license. Now, that didn't have a practical effect because Larry was no longer actually employed. But he was definitely still Dr. Egbert, had been for 60 years, and was doing all kinds of volunteer work with medical organizations and doctors' organizations. And when they took away his license, so he was suddenly Mr. Egbert, it was certainly an emotional blow. And for many reasons, and it's a long story I won't go into, he died about a year later. He had a heart attack while having an asthma attack on a hot summer night here in Baltimore, less than 3 miles from the incinerator, which pollutes the air terribly. Baltimore air is very bad. So, yeah, he didn't die right then from the emotional struggle, but it was part of what led to his deterioration and death. Absolutely.
So in your experience, I mean, you mentioned the money aspect, but did the prosecution, when the Supreme Court of Georgia was hearing this case, did they seem to care at all that it was overturned, or was there this feeling, well, we got what we wanted, so we ruined this person's life, or we ruined this organization, so whatever, it's fine. I wasn't expecting it to stick.
That's an excellent question, and I can't say as in having seen any documentation, but yes, that's exactly what we assumed. They got what they wanted by tarring the organization, making it basically unable to function for about a year, and pulling a good bit back. That case in Arizona I mentioned was a woman who had had longstanding serious mental health issues, not physical, and that used to help people like that. Not somebody who just said, I'm depressed and want to get out of here, but somebody with long documented problems. And they don't do that anymore. And that's a shame, but that certainly was part of the intention, probably not even really consciously thought of. But yeah, if we can get them to pull back from what they used to do, that's a win. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so kind of wrapping up here, because you've been through this and you've gotten to the other side, what advice would you give to folks who find themselves in the midst of this right now?
Be aware that making very serious charges stick is not their purpose. They want to frighten you. They want you to back off, even get you to testify against each other. For heaven's sake, don't do that. Stand firm. Understand that this is to terrify you, not really to throw you in jail for the rest of your life. What they want to do is to get the project held up, stopped. And yes, they're going to harass individuals, and it sucks, and you're going to have a hard time for a while. But no, you probably won't do any jail time. They might try to fine you, but it is an organizational effort, so even that will probably be covered. The main thing is to shut down the effort to try to stop Cop City. And you all know how very important that is. So please don't be terrified by this. The purpose of it is to obstruct the good work, not to really punish individuals for being involved. And they will tell you a bunch of lies. They will misrepresent and threaten. But the real purpose is to back off on resistance to Cop City, not to punish you. So try to stand firm, stand together.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful message and a powerful way to wrap up here. Ellen, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us and sharing your story.
Thank you, Eleanor. It's really important.